Hey everyone, my name's Garrett Cox. This is my first video discussion for History 530. First off, I just have to say this article and the other research I did for this threw me for a loop. The story hooked me from the first reading of the title of the article in the discussion instructions. So, just a quick summary. I read the article about the Quaker executions. In the mid-1600s in Massachusetts, there was a series of executions. It just so happened that the Puritans, who essentially controlled Massachusetts, were executing Quakers who were apparently trying to witness or shine the light to the colony. In a very real but ironic fashion, the Puritans did not want any other types of religion running amok in their colony. And this is ironic because the Puritans just escaped Europe and England because of religious intolerance, and they turn around and do the same thing. They issued a banishment order to those Quakers who were witnessing in Massachusetts on punishment of death if they returned to the colony. There were 4 Quakers that were executed for returning to the colony. After a brief description of the executions in the article, some of the events surrounding them, the author, Pestana, begins to describe how each side, Puritan and Quaker, was writing and publishing about the executions. Many of the Quakers felt those that were executed died as martyrs, but the Puritans wrote about them as heretics. Very soon after the executions, the writings from each group reflected those ideas. Puritans would write and even preach sermons from the pulpit discussing how the Quakers were executed, who were executed were heretics, and the heretics were attacking the pure religion that the Puritans were so adamantly protecting. But the Quakers had a much different perspective, obviously. Even a letter from one of the most famous Quaker martyrs, Mary Dyer, shows this perspective. In the article by Madeline Ward, Mary Dyer writes to the Boston court with disdain, saying that they had made a law to take away the lives of innocent servants of God. Clearly, Dyer sees herself as a martyr, as an innocent servant of God, performing the will of God. On the other hand, the Puritans repeatedly call the Quakers heretics and blasphemers. Heather Berry wrote in an article about Quaker women during this time, and she quotes the Puritan court as calling the Quakers a cursed sect of heretics and a group that held blasphemous opinions. The religious language that all three authors mentioned early in the conflict between Puritans and Quakers was resonated throughout the writings at the same time. The main point that Pestana makes throughout her article is one that I believe has a ton of merit. Essentially, as time passed, the audience of the Puritan and Quaker writings changed and evolved, and the colony itself evolved. The writings and opinions of executions changed on both sides. Puritan writers originally wrote that the Quakers were religious heretics threatening the Puritan way of life. Eventually, they began writing about the Quakers as people who upset the civil order in the colony, and therefore moved away from the religious threat and turned it into a civil safety threat. The Quakers likewise changed their tune as they wrote over time. Originally, they were writings of prophecy and martyrdom, which slowly turned into more historiographical writings, merely mentioning that terrible events that were coincidentally happening around the same time as the executions. So they weren't necessarily prophesying that bad things happened to the Puritans because they killed the Quakers, but they just stated that these things happened in a coincidental time. I really feel like Pestana did a wonderful job of capturing the flow of how the writings changed and the ideas that were spread throughout Massachusetts as well as through the other colonies.